Welcome, everyone. This is Crash Talk 3D, where we bring real stories, real consequences, and real conversations to the forefront. I'm your host, again, LaDonna Claude. And every time we sit at this table, our mission stays the same. We're here to educate, to empower, and to make sure no family has to learn the hard way. This is where our truth is met, accountability, and where we live experiences becomes tool for change. Again, I'm introducing my co-host, Michael. Michael, introduce yourself to everyone out in the land.
Hi, Michael Gersh. I'm LaDonna's co-host of this wonderful podcast. I am a speaker, comedian, author, a survivor of a drunk driving crash. So this topic is near and dear to my heart.
So I'm going to allow you for the moment while I'm getting myself together, is you to introduce my good friend here, Mr. Brian Swift, who I got to actually hear him, by the way, Michael, in person.
Well, let me introduce. Well, I did not know I was going to introduce them. Otherwise, I would have had notes. That would have been good.
Oh,
Yeah. Thank you. Um,
you
so
want me to you want me to introduce
yes, please. Yeah.
everyone? This is Mr. Brian Swift. I am actually going to let him tell his story, but he is an advocate on impaired driving, and he's one that has also have a story that have lost loved ones. Brian, just for time's sake, if you'll just go ahead and introduce yourself again as well and tell your story and where you're at right now and what kind of brought you to what you're doing now.
Okay, well, thank you. And I just appreciate you guys for doing this. It's so important to get the word out and educate people, right? Because I think you ask the average person about, gee, could it ever happen to me, right? Whether it's cancer, whether it's any horrible thing that happens in life. But one of the horrible things that happened to me was my mom and dad were killed by a drugged driver in 2013.
Okay.
And it's one of those stories. My mom and dad were 72 years old, going on 50. They had just retired, worked hard all their lives, and they were just starting to enjoy retirement. I am from Upper Michigan, is where I grew up. My background really is I was a really bad student and everything, even though I graduated from college, but I really didn't know what I was going to do. And so I just happened to be out at the golf course one day, and I walked in after 9 holes to get a drink, a pop, and there was a guy in a suit there. And I'm like, why is a guy in a suit at a golf course? And I just went up to him and said, hi, I'm Brian Swift. And he goes, well, I'm your congressman. And I'm like, well, what's a congressman? I mean, now I graduated from college again. And so sure enough, I talked to him for 5 minutes, walked out the door, and lo and behold, he had asked the bartender who I was. And he called me about a week later and said, hey, I want you to come to work for me. And that kind of began my saga in politics. And I ended up in politics all my life, working for elected officials. And so after my mom and dad were taken by this person who was high on marijuana, he was driving a logging truck. He ran through a red light on a suspended license. So he had all these things already that
Mhm.
should have never been on the road. But he chose, again, to be high and went through the red light. My dad was killed instantly, and my mom died 3 days later. And so it's just, again, one of those stories where you can't function, you can't operate, you're numb. And that's basically what I did. I went into a hole for a year and a half. But I said, being involved in politics, I knew I had to do something for others. And that kind of began my saga on oral fluid. And I can kind of go through it with you, but
Please.
I didn't want to just keep talking. And I'm one of these people
We
I
have questions.
engage, right? But yeah, that's kind of how my journey began. And what still kind of pains me, even though all the things I'm trying to get accomplished in Michigan and nationally, it's really kind of sad that a guy like me, who knows his way around politics, still has to fight so hard. I pulled in every favor that I had in Michigan when we first got oral fluid as law in Michigan. And we were the first state to use oral fluid at the roadside. We started with 5 counties and then we expanded to all 83. And it was one of those kind of new things, right? Oral fluid, even though other countries for years have been using oral fluid. This is not a new technology. And what this technology does for those of the people out there kind of operates similar, I don't want to say to a breath test, but basically when an officer pulls someone over, they do a field sobriety test, right? Touch your nose, touch your nose, to walk in a straight line, field sobriety test. Then usually they reach next for the breathalyzer. And in this day and age, at least back when I was in high school, you got caught, you probably were drinking, right? And the breathalyzer could determine pretty quickly what your alcohol level was. But with drugs, it's not as easy. And so with this test, you are able to determine in 5 minutes by swabbing your mouth what sorts of drugs do you have in your system. So it's a yes or no. Do you have active THC? Which means that if you don't capture the substance THC, which makes you high, within 90 minutes after smoking it, it dissipates, it starts going out of the body. So these are the sorts of drug interactions that if you don't catch quickly, whereas blood, where you can go, someone is drunk driving, they might take a few hours to go and get a blood draw. Pretty much the blood is going to metabolize the same way it does. But when you're talking about drugs, as I mentioned, THC, if you don't get it quickly, it dissipates. So this test allows for on-site testing. You can test for cannabis. You can test for opioids. A lot of people, heroin, all these things right now, which we call multi-substance impairment. And, I can talk a little bit about all the states right now. We have 32 states. I mean, we were the first, but we now have 32 states in some way, shape, or form that are doing oral fluid that modeled their program after Michigan. And so I believe it's just a matter of time where this will be a standard test that is used to determine, okay. And we have just data, and I can share some of that with you guys from other states that, look, this test, I think people would be just appalled if they knew the amount of people that were on our roads right now that have multiple substances in their blood and are driving around like they don't care about anybody else.
So let me ask this. As being a national spokesman and you're pushing for better tools and technology to detect and stop impaired driving.
Right.
So let's include drug driving, which is the harder test for them to, sounds like, for them to, I guess, for them to, with alcohol. What do you think most people get wrong about drug impaired driving? And what's the one policy change you wish every state would adopt to?
Yeah, so maybe back up when you national spokesman. So in the midst of myself doing just our bill for Michigan, we kind of recognize, look, if it's going on in Michigan, it's happening in other states. And so in the course of working to get my bill in Michigan passed,
Okay.
We formed a national organization called NACID, the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving. And our focus was on multi-substance impairment. So you have organizations like MAD, right, who have been focused on drunk driving. And by the way, MAD and NACID are great partners. We're working great because MAD also knows that multi-substance impairment is really bad on our roads. So we're joining forces. We have a lot of organizations that belong now to NACID. So we're shining a light. But to your question, one of the biggest challenges that I have had, and this goes for Michigan particularly, is that right away they want to go, well, it's another tool that is going to allow law enforcement to pull over minorities. That is the bottom line. Let's be honest, frank with our audience. Let's make no bones about it.
All right.
Do we have bad police officers that make unnecessary stops? Absolutely.
Sure.
Do we have bad doctors? Do we have bad nurses? Absolutely. Any profession, right? There are bad people that are behind the tools that operate things. But is that a reason to say, well, because you have some instances of bad police doing something bad, that we're going to just shun the tools that we have to save lives? And in Michigan, it is particularly apparent because they fight against us, and they're the only group basically, is the ACLU. And that is who has been stifling my bill. And I think it's important also to talk about that. So we had passed my bill. It became law. We had 75 units out there in the field. And then what happened? My law was a pilot. And so that pilot was expiring, and we had to make the law permanent, which we are in the process of doing. But what happened? COVID came in and everything shut down, and our law sunsetted. So I have been back at it after COVID to try now to make my bill permanent. So we, if you can believe this, we were the first state to pioneer and make this a law. We are now behind 32 states that are using this technology. So in Michigan, last summer, I shouldn't say my group, I have advocated for my bill to become permanent. And so we passed a bipartisan bill that has been passed in the House in Michigan. Democrat and a Republican sponsor came together and we passed it in the House. Now we've been waiting in Michigan in the Senate for our bill even to have a hearing. And I've got two people basically that are controlled by the ACLU that will not allow our bill up to be heard. And I keep getting the same excuse that, again, this is all about targeting minorities, when we know, in fact, that more minorities, again, are killed. This is a non-discriminatory killer. Doesn't matter if you're gay, you're straight, you're old, you're young, you're black, you're white. You can pick whatever you want. This is a scourge that does not discriminate. So we need to stop playing games, and we need to use technology that is available to save lives. And this technology will do that, because there are a lot of police officers out there, and I talk to them all the time. They don't have the capability. Again, if you do the field sobriety test, you're kind of iffy. You usually then go to the breathalyzer. Well, what happens if you blow nothing on the breathalyzer? A lot of police will tell me that they just let the person go. And then what happens? And I can demonstrate this, what I'm saying, by statistics. And why I want to pull this up right now, because I think it's very important, is that Minnesota recently did a pilot, modeled again after what we did. And here were the results. So Minnesota's, and this was a few months ago, Minnesota roadside oral fluid testing revealed alarming rates of multi-drug impairment among drivers. Drugs were detected in 87% of voluntary tests. And of those, 62% of the drivers testing positive had one or more substances, meaning that 87% tested for drugs, 62%, right, had multiple, like alcohol, coke, and marijuana, alcohol, you name it, heroin, and prescription drugs. So these toxic cocktails, when you see numbers like this, it is astronomical. And that is why I am so committed to using a tool that works, and we can get these people again off the roads or they kill. And that's basically what this is all about.
I don't want to ask too many questions. You have one for him, Michael?
I had a bunch after reading about Brian, but I want to go back to something you said earlier because I wrote a book about men's grief and that type of stuff. So I'm curious always, especially with men and how we deal with trauma and grief. You said earlier you were in a hole for 1.5 years.
Yeah.
What pulled you out of that?
So I have one sister. I have two nephews. So think about this, right? Half of my family was wiped out, right? My mom, dad, sister, and I, all of a sudden it's gone. And my sister and my two nephews, that's what I have left in life. And my friends, all my friends, their kids. And I just could not sit on the sidelines, number one. Number two was that I couldn't and the reason I told the story about being in politics is that I knew that I couldn't let my experience I had go to waste, because I see these poor victims that come into court and they're taken by the system. It's like, it's not worth fighting. Take a plea deal or do this or do that. And so I felt that at least I know my way around to maneuver. And so, Michael, to your question, I just kind of got that energy where I said, I can sit here and sulk. I can sit here and crawl up in a ball and die, or I can try to have an impact some other way to help somebody else. And that is my whole reason for doing this. That's it. I don't have any, I believe you can help people. I think we've got a huge problem in this country, a drug issue, and let's get these people the help they need. I'm all for, not arrest. Let's educate. Let's at least let people know that if you're on our roads, yes, there is a tool that we have that can detect. And so, you know what? If you want to do drugs, you want to smoke weed, you're not moral.
So here, I'm going to interview, I want to ask one. So if your mom and dad could see what you've built out of that loss, the laws, the advocacy, the lives.
Like, well, this strain is not as, as bad as the other. So I know it's a long kind of answer, Michael, but
Okay.
I just had to, I had to get off the sideline.
Right. Well, we find meaning in death and trauma and grief, which is a healthy way to do it. like you, we could have crawled into a hole, turn to the bottle, say, well, it was me, but then we turn into this to making sure other people don't go through what we went through because it's a living nightmare, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to prevent. Well, my follow-up question is, how do you find balance in life? Now, before we started, we talked about football, right? I don't know
Yeah.
if that's it. I mean, it could lead to the bottle sometimes. I'm a Dolphins fan, you're a Packers fan. It could make us drink. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do you find balance in life?
Yeah, that is a really good one. I work full time. My
Mhm.
day job is I work for physicians. So I'm involved in politics, but just from a healthcare perspective, advocating for physicians and patients.
Interesting.
And so I still am in that business of politics. And so a lot of times I have to tell you, it is overwhelming. When I'm asked to go and speak, I want to be prepared. I don't want to ever do, bad job. I try not to, I try to be there's a time to be with politicians at least. You can try the soft approach sometimes, and sometimes it works, but mostly in this day and age, this soft approach, uh, you got to get to the facts. And no matter what facts are presented, there are people on both sides, right, that are going to go in their holes and they don't care what the facts are. And so that frustrates me and puts stress by doing this. But I have to say that um, I I try, even though I don't think I'm good at it. I try to find other things like football. I used to golf a lot, which I don't do anymore, but travel, spend time with friends, family. So I try. I'm probably not great at it, but I'm determined to make sure that we have oral fluid throughout this country, and we're way behind when it comes to other countries doing this. In so many ways, right? You hear, joy, you need to be doing the way healthcare is done in Sweden or Europe or here or there. We always hear about these better places, but boy, not when it comes to this. You go to another country, and not only do they have oral fluid, they're not given second and third chances when it comes to drunk or drug driving. You're never driving again.
Right,
Mm-mm.
There are harsh penalties.
right, right. So we have about 3 minutes left. I'll leave it to LaDonna to
Okay.
ask her final question and wrap up.
Final question. If your mom and dad could see you of what you built off their loss, the laws, the advocacy, the lives you've probably saved, what do you think they'll say to you?
Uh, I, I, I know they would be proud.
Yes.
Um, Uh, my mom and dad were the type of people, they always were there for somebody else. They'd give you the shirt off their backs. Um, my mom, she loved to entertain and dance and cook food for everybody. And she was like the life of the party, though she never drank. But, and my dad was the funny guy. They were together, all their lives. They were high school sweethearts and all that stuff. And so I they'd be disappointed, I think, if I wasn't doing this and if I didn't try to go on. So I would encourage, and that's the one message too. If there's anybody out there, I can help. Even if it's not to do legislation or whatever, if I can help even talk to and try to get them over these hard times, that's what I want to be able to do.
So if someone had any further questions to reach out to you, do you have an email or contact number you would like them to have?
Yeah, I'll give them my bswift.texas@gmail.com would be one way. Or my cell number, and I'm happy to share my cell. It's 312-330-4894. It's a Chicago number, which I kept, but I'm in Texas. And again, anybody, there's a lot of nights, right? You're lonely when you lose somebody and there's nobody to talk to. Those are the hardest times. And I've been through it, Michael. You know, right? Victims, survivors somehow continue to survive, and so we got to be there for other people.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for turning your unimaginable pain into the protection the rest of us need to definitely hear. That's exactly what Crash Talk 3D is about. It's about real consequences and real compassion and real change. And to everyone listening, buckle up, stay sober and behind the wheel, and look out for each other out there. Hit subscribe, hit like, give any comments you like. Until we meet again, Crash Talk 3D. Brian, thank you, friend.
Love you
Really
guys.
appreciate you. Michael, always much love to you, my friend.
Thank you. And Brian, I will say this, if you're looking for a fun, humorous speaker at your next conference in 2027, I'm your guy.
There you
Yes,
go,
he is.
man.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, well, Nason, actually, we're having a conference. So I'm gonna bring that up. That'd be great to have some humor, right? Instead of just yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We'll
we're gonna
talk
be
more about
meeting
that.
next year in Washington, D.C. So
5
yeah,
hours away.
there you go. All right, Michael. Thank you,
Thank you so much,
LaDonna.
Brian.
Love you. All right.
Love you guys.
Bye now.
Hold on.